phone not working anymore?
Yeah, it didn't work, but and I
Hi. Thank you so much for joining us tonight for one of Westwind's first readings in almost half a decade. It's amazing to see so many people out in the crowd tonight, and I just want to again thank you guys for being here, especially in the midst of midterm season and also still sort of mid-pandemic. We're very excited to have and Professor Nelson here, and I will just start us off with a bio from Kien Lam. He is the author of Extinction Theory, winner of the 2021 National Poetry Series, forthcoming from released now from UGA Press Fall 2022. He is a Kien Lam Fellow and received his MFA from Indiana University. He lives in Los Angeles and works in esports and television. He is currently working with Paramount Plus and the creators of American Vandal on an esports mockumentary series called Players. Give it up for him.
Hey, thanks for being here. I realized that bio was kind of outdated. So for Players is out. Go stream it on Paramount Plus. You can get a free. We might still be doing a free week or something. I never got Paramount Plus myself. I just borrowed my friend's account. So do the same thing. Or maybe I don't know. Maybe you like Paul's Drag Race. They have that on there. That's what people keep trying to sell me. I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I'm just gonna stick with Crunchyroll. Is my thing. But yeah, it's great to be back on a college campus. It's been like a decade since I've spent much time on any sort of university space, and so seeing people out studying always it's always heartwarming for me. I was not a particularly good student, which might be weird. It's like, oh, he's got a book out. He was probably studying, but no, I would I don't like people study here. And I always find it fascinating because I would always study in my room because it's like, all right, I'm gonna study for like 5 minutes and go play StarCraft for like 4 hours. And so I would trick myself into rewards. Ultimately, what would end up happening is I would just not study and go play games, which is still what I do. But yeah, thanks for coming to a poetry reading. Thank you to Westwind, Haas, to Jade, and to Danny for hosting and being here. Thank you, all of you, for being here. And thanks to those of you who spent any time with the poems or with the books. I appreciate you guys. It's a privilege to be the first reader in half a decade to be reading at UCLA. And so I'll be reading a few poems tonight. I know this might be the first poetry reading for some of you. I don't want to this isn't me trying to set expectations low, but every time I tell my friends about poetry, it's like, yeah, bring a flask. Let's push a little tipsy as we go. I love poetry, but poetry readings can sometimes be a drag, so I'm gonna my best to make it not be a drag for you. This first poem is called Big Bang Theory. In the beginning, there was me, small creature floating in a wet universe, then light and sound, and God was there. But he looked like my father. Like he'd been smoking since he was a kid. His breath, the 8th day of creation, which was the first time he wondered what it meant to love a man, what it meant to open his heart to the Lord. This is how a universe begins. Some bloody animal inches out of a womb, gasping for breath. Some deity's brain spills ink all over a clean sheet of paper. All of life compresses into a single molecule. Dotted I, everything in the present tense, until a non-stop explosion scatters some matter into planetary systems set to embrace life. It's a miracle. When I look back that far, I know my father would one day sit on our back porch in his denim jacket and press smoke through the screen door like he wanted to make a new system for breathing. If it's true, the old scriptures, that man was made in the image of God, then God might be gay and grayed with 4 kids set against an infinite backdrop of space and love and smoke. And my parents started texting me about this stuff, and I'm like, I'm not gonna talk to you about it. And my sister found out the book was coming out. My sister texted me, she's like 25, and she's like, that's not that. And so she texted me and goes, hey, is this reveal our family secrets and all our family drama? I'm like, read it and find out. But actually, I think we're mostly. The second poem has an epigraph by my friend, who is a poet named Emily Jungman Yoon, and the epigraph is, "Let us eat what makes us holy." It's called apogee. I am holy-tongued, for God has found his way from my mouth, where I have said his name over and again. This is how Moses parted the Red Sea. He said God, until the dry air parted the water. A strong enough thirst becomes faith. This is how I learned English, chanting the alphabet until it felt natural, like language is something you are born with and not given or taken. Now, when I try to remember the exact moment I stopped thinking in Vietnamese, and how that must have been the borderline of my migration. On one side, me, God blessed and assimilated, and the other, the boy I am trying to remember. If it was fear or curiosity that held me when I first heard English. If such forced consumption was bravery. Bilingual folks in here? Do any of you think in the other language? You think in the other language? That's very impressive to me. I feel like every time I've tried it. Okay, I guess that's what being means. As somebody who is no longer fluent in anything, I feel like when I was learning other languages, my head would be like, all right, you have that special mother-son bond you see on the Discovery Channel, when blue whales offer 100 gallons of milk each day to their offspring and show them the migratory routes coded into their DNA, which is not too different from your mother sliding you a little extra food when you take your break. Family legends say you were born there, straight out of a bag of ground beef in spite of regulations, and the meat, if you can call it that, tasted fine. And in spite of the strict codes your boss maintains, the plastic bag of meat still looks like a plastic bag of meat. Which is to say, it looks like it just crawled out of some creature's womb. Which is why you lie in bed sometimes in the middle of the night when your stomach growls for third meal and think about all the nasty shit that must be part of your genetic composition, the cattle flesh minced and salvaged and picked clean off the bone, the mystery chemicals, a mixture of sweat and blood, all the stupid things you've placed into your mouth, all the times you said, Mom, and she turned her head to look at you, to see what you wanted. Yeah, it was, it's like my family, there was, well, I have 2 brothers that are younger than me, but all 3 of us, we did summer jobs at Taco Bell, in different years. Because my mom worked at Taco Bell for decades, it was her second job. I don't know, you guys have parents that work second jobs, you kind of get that kind of lifestyle. So we all did our shifts at Taco Bell, it was really just weird. Really, this is a very true poem, people would just call her mom at work, and I was just, I couldn't not to this day get used to it. I feel like I barely call my mom anything. And so all of these other people, it was like one of those, you don't know what you have till it's gone. Maybe I do like my mom. It's you just stop calling it that. Love theory. When I butt dial my mother, I am drunk and trying to convince the woman I am seeing that I am trustworthy. She calls back 3 times and leaves a voicemail before I realize my mistake. She says she hopes everything is okay. When I call her back, I only tell her, sorry, I can't hear you. It was an accident. Love you. And I hang up and wonder if this is how we will spend the rest of our lives. One accidental phone call at a time. When the man selling Korean barbecue tacos finishes setting up and no one else is in line, I know the night is not a mistake. The woman I've been seeing tells me she wants to trust me. My tongue pulls the pork from the taco shell. When I think too much about what I'm eating, I stop eating. She says she wants to give us. I want someone to let me tie them to a string and reduce their weight to paper. Turn them into a kite and let me run beneath them until they miss the easy way the foot trusts the ground. I want to pull them down and be the first extension of the earth they touch. Quantum jump. I am false bravado, more than I am whatever regular bravado is. Whatever creature could rise from its seat each day unchanged by Earth's tilt. And if I say I'm not suicidal, then maybe I'm fooling nobody. There's something to be learned from watching a fly slam itself into a screen catcher over and over, the little grid in net that just found itself caught behind, even if the net's been there the whole time. If there's a way in, then there must be a way out. And if there's a way to catalog the small bits of joy each day, a little note here about catching a fly in a cup and letting it live a while longer, a note there on how to fold those moments into my palms the way children catch fireflies, and tell the little doubters in the pews of their bodies that the buds will light their nights forever. This faith, this understanding that the tails flickering are so much bigger than the stars. That come out every night and hold them close to your face. This perspective, a kind of science children will believe until they are older and tall enough to face the night. When the distance separating the foot and the sky is the smallest it will ever be. I understand someone invented the plane. I understand there are many ways to leave the ground. I have jumped. I have hung from a tree branch. I've never landed in the same spot. I think there's a couple of gamer folks in here, so let's go. It's not just gamers. I don't want to like stereotype, but I bet most of you eat at your computer and your keyboards are disgusting. But not me. I'm not like the other gamers. So this is, I guess, dedicated to all you nasty gremlins. It's called Apocalypse with Crumbs. God needed to chew with his mouth closed, such that little crumbs didn't fly off his tongue and turn into little birds, not out of desire, but necessity. Such that the dinosaurs aren't just the lick of drool running from his mouth, which swallowed the Cretaceous era in one gulp. Evolution is Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam, except with the T-Rex's claw touching a bird's wing, and the bird's wing touching the sun, which touched Icarus all the same. Folly, a repeating strand of DNA. See all the wars in human history. See all those people building upon each other's deaths. See me in my underwear, grinding my teeth against a Nature Valley granola bar. All the crumbs an avalanche. What a fine display of hunger, of avarice. I am watching the world's next great extinction. The oceans are rising. The air is warming. So much of the earth is now being consumed by humans. I can only hope that once we are swallowed, again, something with wings and a pleasant morning song will drip back toward the earth. Two more. This one, I was in New York last week doing a reading, and it started raining, which was like I've been in LA for like 7 years now, so you very quickly become accustomed to it not raining ever. But I love rain, so this is a poem kind of about rain. And it's called I've Lost My Umbrella Again, which also, I've lost like 5 umbrellas in my life, so I never buy umbrellas anymore because I always end up losing. I just like leave them on the bus or something, and just, for whatever reason, I cannot be trusted. If I ask you for an umbrella tonight, do not give it to me, unless you're trying to lose your umbrella, in which case, give it to me. I've lost my umbrella again. I forgot the rain, left it in the sky again. I like when they pull tiny swords out from under the umbrella in movies. I hope it functions as a normal umbrella during the non-movie parts of their lives. Standing with someone beneath an umbrella as it rains, as if you built your own portable world. Under there, you could do anything. There is the obvious, such as holding hands, or planting tiny minnows in each puddle you walk by so that they can grow into big sharks. You can imagine anything when you share an umbrella with someone. Even on sunny days, it is used to block out the light. Look how easy it is to create your own tiny darknesses. I will forget my umbrella again. When I look for it later, I will instead find the rain. This last poem, I guess some of you are starting, like, I don't know if it's just starting writing, so like you write, right? When I was first starting writing, I still do this sometimes. I think one of the techniques or whatever I would do is I would think of a joke, and when I would figure out why it wasn't funny anymore, that's when the poem would end. And which I guess that's like the shtick for a lot of comedians is, well, a lot of comedians are very sad people, but not me, I'm very happy. So this poem is kind of, I got into that era. It's called Anagrams. I am an anagram of my father. In America, it is anapound. It is an archaic system of measurement. I have my father's eyes. I am made of letters I didn't learn until I was 5. A is for assimilation, which is an anagram for cultural exorcism. If I say I'm glad I can speak English, I mean to say English is an anagram for God's tongue. I mean to say I don't believe in people who expect to be trusted. My father gave me a chili pepper and told me it was sweet. He showed me the plant it grew on, its stem striking the sky like lightning, like the pepper that would burn my tongue is 1 in a million. Million is an anagram for poor, which is an anagram for telling restaurants I wasn't 10 to get the kids' buffet price until I was 14. At 14, lying became an anagram for divorce. Divorce became an anagram for beginning, as in the beginning there was light. And light said, let there be God. And God said, let there be life. And my father said, let this pepper teach you humility. There are days where I'm bilingual and days where I don't speak with my parents. My father, so my mother, is an anagram for love. This is not how it works. Dad is an anagram for bad. I've been piling the letters into my mouth for a long time, and I still can't make a good anagram for love. There's EVOL, which is an abbreviation for evolve, which is an anagram for aging, which is an anagram running from your birth. The start gun sounded off, you breathing harder each step. It is easier to be struck by lightning than to win the lottery. You stand in an open field with your hands pressed in prayer, arrow above your head towards the sky, and you say light when you mean life, and you say God when you mean good, and you say Father when you mean further, and you say you when you mean I. Thank you.
Thank you again for that wonderful reading. And in a second here, we're going to transition to a conversation with Kien and Danny Snelson. But really quick, I just wanted to say a few thank yous. Thank you to Reed Wilson, our advisor, the campus programs committee, and the English department, who all helped fund the reading today, and to our technical staff here. And also, if you guys like what you heard, which you guys like what you heard, we have some flyers in the front, or if you got your own with a discount code for the book that you can order. You can also get it at Skylight Books in Los Feliz, and we really hope that you buy a book after this reading. So before we transition, I'll also read out a little bio for Danny Snelson. So Danny Snelson is a writer, editor, and archivist. His research and teaching blend a study of poetry and poetics with works on digital and network cultures, material text studies, and media theory. He has a book project titled The Little Database, which reads a contingent media poetics in works of print, sound, and cinema from within new media contexts. So some of his books include Full Bleed, A Morning Letter for the Printed Page, Apocalypse Reliquary, 1984 to 2000, Radios, XEXTXT, Epic Lyric Poem, and Inventory Arousal with James Hoff. And now we're going to transition to our conversation.
Get some chairs set up. Thank you so much, Jay. That's such a
Yeah.
No, we're doing another like debate style.
You make it or Douglas?
Oh, no.
Why don't we? Well, we should both sit next to each other on like the far end of the. No, just joking.
Hey, would it be possible to move a little closer together? Sorry.
I mean, I think people can probably hear me. Is that okay?
I always feel like this happens when the people in the back are like kind of shy. Like we can project it.
Let's use
Well, they can be on.
Use the mics? Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Weird. Because people in the back can sometimes be like shy, and I never want to like
Mhm.
make them like have to. Because you're always like, oh, can you hear me? Who's actually gonna be the guy in the back? It's like, oh, I can't hear you. Not having books. Normally there are books here, but there's a kerfuffle with my press. But if you do have a chance to buy it, I would appreciate it. I feel like an Uber driver. Leave a review. I think the reviews help like SEOs or whatever. And like I don't like. Dude, I think you are aspiring poets. Poets don't make any money. So when I ask this, it's mostly for my own ego, so I can see the number kind of go up a little bit. I have a lot of insecurities. You might be able to tell my work. So kind of need a nice little pat on the back.
Well, I'm going to start off by saying I rate 5 stars. And I cannot recommend enough this book, which I've been so I'm crackling with electricity based on how excited I am about this book. And I do want to point to Kien's other works, both as a TV writer for Paramount Plus, Players, no spoilers, my questions. I do want to kind of connect up this work to the wide body of things that Kien has written, up to and including some really in-depth and poignant games journalism about League, and that also verges into thinking about the same family members that you heard in some of these poems. So I'll get to that in just a minute, but I just want to kind of launch into some questions. I have like so many minutes because I was so excited. And then I think we'll have a little conversation and we'll open up to the audience. So you can start crafting your own thoughts as we speak. On the back cover, it says this is a collection of pseudoscience poems. I love everything that's pseudo, but I'm kind of curious about like what this means in particular. I'm just thinking about your poem Perpetual Motion, which is a kind of pseudoscience poem. I'd say it's pataphysical, the idea that we have these kind of imaginary solutions. But I think you saw this in Apogee as well, which you all just heard, slipping into a whale from your mother, back and forth into different kind of realms of science where words and logic slip into each other. You call this at one point in the book a sleight of hand. And now this to me seems like the aim of poetry, right? To both make the word and the reasoning behind the words we use strange to us, to somehow blur the lines. So I kind of wanted to just start off by asking you, what is the Kien Lam scientific process or pseudoscientific process as you're crafting these kinds of discursive slippages?
Yeah, I think that, so the poetry thing in terms of, I don't know, a question I get a lot from people who don't study poetry, don't engage with poetry is like, or not so much a question as a comment, it's like, oh, I don't understand poetry, or like when I engage with poetry, it's kind of confusing, I just don't get it. And like, if you listen to a song, like K-pop is like most people look at this and be like, oh, I don't get it, because it doesn't matter if you get it or not, that's not the point of art. And so with science, something that I saw a tweet the other day that I very much agree with, which is like they don't get why STEM and like liberal arts majors are always pitted against each other. It's really, we should be like, it should be us against business kids, because to me, at the end of the day, science in particular is a way of trying to understand how life functions at like very basic fundamental levels. And to me, art does the same type of study where it is trying to understand how we function as people, how things function at a very big level. You're trying to be like, why do this guy just broke my heart, this girl just broke my heart, why do I feel sad? There's like, I'm sure there's probably a scientific answer to that. I've never looked up the science of like endorphins or whatever. But like poetry is trying to figure out those answers as well. And I think there's a lot of beauty in both science and in poetry of trying to understand things. And there's just this idea of like, I'm just confused, I'm lost, and I want to figure things out. And I think both science and poetry try to do those things. And so for me, it was kind of a mix of the two. When I was writing, it was like trying to create my own rules. And so I've always just been fascinated. Same with like, I think they just released the images of the Pillars of Creation. And I don't know if you've seen them, but it's like, they're fucking cool. And somebody's showing me like, oh, this is how big they are as well. That made me feel something in that particular moment that I could probably describe if I really wanted to convey it out to you. But somebody else might say the same thing and describe it in a different manner. And I find that to be really fascinating. That's why I'm always going to return to poetry, because it's always a way for me to kind of explore those type of things. And the same with the sciences, I think, are always just finding that same motive, so just through a different method.
I love that. I love that approach, and I think that so much about that is one of the things that poetry does is it tunes us to like a specific moment. You can like dilate in and out of time, and you can kind of linger with something, which made me think of your epigraph, which I wanted to ask you about. There's an epigraph to the book by the haiku master, the proto-Twitter poetry format. That's how you might know. The haiku master Kobayashi Gisa, who wrote "The world of dew is the world of dew, and yet, and yet." It's sort of like beautiful, sort of like moment that's full of like a kind of like enigmatic recognition of something that exists, and also a kind of like confusion about what it is. So I wanted to ask you, and you can't quite see it, I guess, when you're speaking, but these poems are sort of long, they run down the page, but they have these very short lines in a way that almost to me, well, before I speculate, I guess I'm just really curious on one, how you chose this epigraph, and how you think about placing these things on a page versus kind of reading them out loud as you just did.
Yeah, the epigraph is a poem that I've long loved. It is, like, to me, it's about desire. It's like, the world of dew is the world of dew, and yet, it's like this idea of, I know what's here, I kind of get it, but I want more is kind of, and I'm somebody, I feel like, I'm very bad at being grateful for what I do have. Like, I feel like life could be perfect. I could have like everything going for me. Like, I've been in relationships where it's like, oh my God, it's like, you love me too much. And for me, it's always like, there's gotta be something more. There's therapists out there who will tell me, I'm sure they have actually talked to a therapist more about this. But basically, I think most of us can relate to at some point or another having like things be pretty good or like well even, and you still, there's this desire to want something more for whatever reason. It's just, I think the idea of being content is something that scares me. I think contentness and stagnancy are kind of walking hand in hand. But as I've gotten older, I realized that's just, again, a lot of like dumb fears. And I think contentness can be very different from stagnancy, and it's something I've been able to differentiate a lot better as I've gotten older. So that poem has always really stuck to me. I don't have a tattoo, but if I ever did get a tattoo, that would be, I think I'd get like an earth and like a dewdrop, like, or something of that nature. I think that would be, and I do want a tattoo one day. I'm just terrified of needles and blood. So one of these days I will overcome that fear and go get a tattoo. As for the form itself, one of my teachers, I don't know how I keep pulling up. One of my teachers once told me to think of when you're like deleting stuff on the page, kind of think about controlling the reader's breath. And, like, how are they gonna engage with the poem? And so for me, I like short lines because as a reader, I'm a very lazy reader. And so if you have short lines, it tricks me into thinking it's a lot shorter than it actually is. Because when I see like big blobs of text, I'm like, oh, this is a long poem. I don't have to play like a game first, and then I'll come back to this poem later. But if it's like short lines, it's like, oh, I can do this. And you get one short poem, you get another one short line, you just trick yourself all the way through the book. So in a lot of ways, it's a technique to kind of get readers. In the same way, like section breaks, I think, do a similar thing, just kind of getting people to feel more comfortable with engaging in the poem. Like, if you see something on Twitter, if it's short, you'll probably read it. If it's on Instagram and it's short, you'll probably read it. Anything that's longer, it's a little trickier. And so for me, it's definitely just thinking about how I personally am very lazy and interact with things. There's a like, the quotes are some like just, then the poems kind of fit within the format as well. But definitely it was a more breath thing was how I was thinking about it first.
That's so good. I'm tagging a bunch of like game metaphors that I'll return to in a moment. But thinking about controlling breath, like as though the human is a kind of player of these poems. But before I get into that, I want to think a little bit about, I guess, the title, which at first, I was expecting you read Extinction Theory, and it's like, this book about the Anthropocene. Yeah, these would be poems about, dinosaurs and so on. And there's a dinosaur or two in your poems. But I'm really curious about how theory plays in this book. Like, are you a theorist? What is theory? You started with Big Bang Theory, there's poems, there's gorilla theory, migration theory, smoking gun theory, love theory, God theory. I wanted to ask, on one hand, what is theory? Because I find myself confused about that all the time. And two, what or who is going insane And I think this might have something to do with what you were saying about relationships, that it's about these small extinctions in daily life. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about the title, and if you can unpack sort of what you're thinking about when you think about extinction and theory.
Yeah, I think for me, theories is like, so I like trivia nights. I don't love them as much as I would like to, but I very much enjoy trivia, but I'm like the worst person to go to trivia with, because I'm very confident when I say something. And so I'm like, oh yeah, that's definitely this. And then, so the group will be like, okay, he seems like he knows, but like, I'm literally just guessing, but I will just say it confidently. And I will tell them too, but because it sounds like I'm right, we often go with my answer, and I'm often wrong. I am not good with trivia. I don't know shit. I don't watch movies really. I don't really watch much TV. I'm the worst trivia person, but it's good fun. Like my group is called Joe and the Deadweights, and I am not Joe. So that'll tell you what you need to know. So theories for me is like this idea of conjecturing a answer to something that I'm kind of pondering. And so with the poems, it's a lot of stuff that just doesn't have a right answer. When you're thinking about writing like towards emotion and towards feeling, again, like basics of like why am I sad, why am I happy? There isn't like sometimes there's a correct objective answer. Like if I am eating a Twix bar, like I'm happy because I like the Twix bar. But sometimes it's much more complicated than that. When you're around your family, I think in particular, it can be very complicated to describe any sort of interaction or feeling you might have with them. And so a lot of the theory poems are kind of like poking at things that I don't have a clear answer on. Sometimes it's relationships, sometimes it's family, sometimes it's just inner demons that I'm wrestling with. So it's a lot of different things that I'm trying to, here's a question, the theory is an attempt to answer this question that doesn't actually have an answer. But at the same time, of course, because it doesn't have a correct answer, that means it also has like a million correct answers. And so it's all a matter of perspective, right? And so the poems are kind of a way to jump into that space of like uncertainty.
That's beautiful, and that's really beautiful. And that space of uncertainty is so, I mean, you talk about comedy and rules, but there's like these poems are really poignant, and you really draw, between these kind of playful slippages, even within the anagrams, you find your father discovered in another word, or you think through the sexuality of your father, your relationship to your mother, that there's a whole intimate view of family that happens in these poems. And just for want of time, I want to bridge that a little bit to your journalism. Because I found myself so moved. There's a piece I recommend for everyone to find, The High Road, where you reflect on your little brother, Kien Lam, who's a professional player for Cloud9. And it's a really intimate view of this family. Like you see pictures of the family, there's details in the article. And so I was reading them side by side, and I was learning so much. But I was really struck by this one line you wrote. It's okay if I quote it back to you. You said, quote, "And games are a language we've always understood. The losses stay with you, the wins are fleeting, always trying to slip away from your grip. Reaching for them, though, is the thing we understand very well." End quote. So that just a relationship to the fleetingness of language, the fleetingness of winning in games. I guess I wanted to just hear a little bit about how you relate these two forms, or how you capture family moments or your own life in your poems versus your journalism.
Yeah, just any League of Legends players in here? Okay, so a couple. Yeah, so actually, my little brother, just to be clear, he's a former pro player. He's retired now. He retired at like 25. Pro gamers really weird. But he's very good at League of Legends. That was like 5 years ago. So I don't want to give him too much credit for being good now. Nowadays, it's me. I feel like I'm the better gamer at certain things these days. So yeah, always gotta keep the competitive edge on. Sure. Can you repeat it? Can you I need to get the jab in one.
Yeah, no, that's so important. That's exactly what I was asking about. It's really like how you find these different modes or ways to relate yourself to your family, and how you're able to, I guess the differences like how these different modes are able to address a lot of the same themes. When you're thinking about games, you're also writing about your family, which I think is unusual in games journalism.
Yeah.
When you're writing these poems, you're also writing about your family, even as you're thinking about a theory of language.
I think that one was just kind of coincidental. I feel like it's not often you meet a poet that happens to have a professional video game playing brother. So it just things just kind of aligned, and it was just an easy thing to write about. In terms of like journalism and like more like essay type format, I think growing up, I'm sure at some point, maybe you guys went to better schools than I did. Teachers always like, oh, don't include the I voice, like don't write about yourself, like don't do that in like essays or whatever. But there's always shit about yeah, of course you wouldn't include I in writing an essay like George Washington. But they don't really teach you, I think, the beautiful form of like a more narrative essay in the same way. Like I think anybody who's done any type of journalism of that, I can't imagine you're trying to show that to the world, but if you did, there's a lot of I in there. And I think with journalism, that was always my favorite journalism to kind of build off of. I was a big sports guy growing up as well. I don't think this was Grantland before you guys' time.
Yeah.
Grantland, I think, was a collection of some of the best sports writers in the US, honestly, at the time, writing in English. And it was like ESPN Sunset. It was a lot of long form journalism that had a lot of beautiful, weird stuff on it. It was just a lot of writers kind of flexing, like, oh, these are things I want to do. And of course, it ended up dying out in the same way a lot of traditional sports media does these days. People just don't read, which sucks. Like as a writer, like that is a shitty thing to be like, yeah, people don't read these days. But I'm somebody, I still like reading. I don't like videos. I feel like videos take me it's like a 5-minute video. I'm out of there. It's too long. But if it's like an 8-second cat video, you get me in on that shit. So there's like a fine line. But with articles, I feel like I can take my time with it. I can return to it, and it's easy for me to consume it in a way that videos I don't enjoy. But I think that in a lot of ways, this medium, like I said, it was just kind of happenstance. But I think the poetry kind of lended itself to my sports journalism in the sense of like, I'm trying to write something that other people are going to care about. I'm going to try and relate to you. I'm going to talk about myself. I'm going to talk about things that I care about. I'm going to be like honest. Like I like this. I don't like this. I'm not trying to like write some critical piece on like League of Legends. It's like it's fucking League of Legends. Like, at the end of the day, like who cares if like somebody like if this League of Legends team in 2018 was better on this week than this other League of Legends team, nobody's going to remember in like 5 years. You might remember something about one of the players. You might remember something about like a team as like a personality, right? And I think the same way in sports. Like, there's a few guys, and it's always like men in particular, very good at remembering like baseball rosters, like football rosters from like 10 years ago. But like I think but that's the kind of stuff like if you hear them trying to explain to you like, oh, this is why the 2008 Detroit Tigers are great. Who fucking cares? Like you don't care. But if there's a good story to it, then you might care. And I think that's kind of my approach to sports journalism and to journalism in general. It's like make people care about what you're talking about.
That's so good. That's so good. And I think you also, I mean, it's also interesting to think about playing these forms. With Grantland, I will recommend 17,776, which is the name of one of the best. I'm just going to say that name, nothing else. But I guess I kind of want to, especially because, our audience here are students, many of whom are thinking about writing careers, thinking about poetry, but also journalism, but also, this project now on Paramount that you worked on, Players. I wonder if we can maybe just kind of bridge this conversation toward some of your own personal narrative. I'm kind of just curious how poetry and professional writing mix or don't mix, do they mix? And I wrote my question down this way. I wrote, how do you put down a controller and pick up a pen?
Lately I don't. But I got very good. I don't know if I ever plays Teamfight Tactics, but I hit rank 4 in NA yesterday. And then I ran it down, so I'm not rank 4 anymore. But I'm very good at that game. That's my jam. But in terms of writing, this is something, actually, I like talking to students about this because I feel like, I don't know, there's probably a few English majors in here, but people, there's this idea that English majors are useless. And I think that's so, it's so dumb. A lot of the smartest people I meet that have jobs are English majors. But there isn't a traditional path to get to work, right? Whereas if you're a software engineer, you'll get a job right out of college. That's just the truth of it. Software engineering is very high demand. There's 50 million other majors that are not software engineering, not English, that do much worse than English. I think English majors, the thing that English majors do well is it teaches you how to communicate, and getting a job is mostly communicating. It's you just have to be able to convince the person you're talking to that you're not a dumbass. And I feel like English majors are taught to think critically, and they're taught to communicate their skill set, and they're taught to there's also a level of desperation among English majors where they'll make yeah, I'll do whatever I need. I'll be whoever you need me to be, I can do it. But I think English majors there's a lot of valuable life skills that they learn, and I feel like a lot of the English majors I've met end up finding a lot of different weird jobs. Some of them, a couple of the writers I work with, some of them are country managers. Some like country managers are just managing like League of Legends over in like the Philippines or something. I ended up in sports journalism. I wrote in TV for a little bit. But English majors end up in a lot of different places. I think it's a really, if you like it, then do it. Like finding a job comes a lot later. Or you can change to computer science and software engineering and get like paid way too much money right out of college. But then like I feel like those kids always have like some issue. Like they always have a little messed up. They're like 22 and then they get like $200,000 for their first job, and then suddenly they're like this weird ego and they have too much money. And I feel like you really need to go through that struggle where you're like out of your first job, you're gonna pay like it's like $30,000 a year. You're living with 4 people. That teaches you. So by the time you're 30, I feel like the English major is a more well-rounded person. There's a lot of career paths that really open up. So that's my go English majors. I say that as I left my job in June, so I'm currently unemployed. So take that with what you will. I'm voluntarily unemployed and writing, so that is hopefully I'll voluntarily employ myself soon. But for now, I'm having fun. So.
We have this video recorded, so I propose that our department use that as our promotional materials. I think that would be that's one way to bring folks in. I don't want to go on too long, because I know we want to open up to questions with a little bit more time. Yeah. So I'm using this question of like the struggle too, like no spoilers about players, but a lot of that narrative is about young people, either like those who are up and coming, confronting those who have been in the sport for some time. But it's also about like youth and money and sort of like figuring out your way in the world, maybe a little bit sooner than you're supposed to or something. This makes me wonder, so we talk about these practices kind of next to each other, but I wonder if they're connected. Like, I don't know, this may be my own perversion, but like as a poet, like I see everything kind of poetically. Like like something about poetry. This is another ad for English department and stuff. Like poetry changes your brain. I think it changes the way you think about language. I think it changes the way that you perceive the world around you. So what I wanted to know if you feel that way, and if there's a poetry to league, actually, like is a bigger question. Like, do you see a prosody or a kind of poetics to an esports match, league, or I guess I should ask about team fight tactics instead. But I guess I wanted, like, what does it mean to be both a poet and a player? This question.
I think that honestly, a lot of people who meet me are very surprised that I do poetry. It's not like if you meet me first, I'm very like I joke around a lot. I play a lot of games. People describe me as a very normal poet. There's a lot of poets you do meet that are like, oh, that's clearly a poet. I've never been mistaken for that in my entire life. And so has gaming changed the way I see the world? Yeah, like you play League of Legends, you start to think maybe people suck. Like anybody who's played online games, like you start to see the worst in humanity. You play like competitive online video games. So anybody that's engaged with the gaming space at all, just like it's full of incels and like some of the worst people. You also meet a lot of really neat people in that space. There's always a mixed bag. We're like most poets I meet, like even if I don't like them, at the end of the day, I'm fairly confident they're not an awful human being. I cannot say that about gaming, and so that has been a nice way for me to like kind of ground myself and like, yeah, the world has a lot of different people. Some of them suck, but in that suckiness, you gotta learn to cooperate so you can win. Because at the end of the day, winning is more important than appeasing them. But I do think that for me with poetry, I think everybody has their own system and things that they do that kind of help them go. I just pull up my Gmail every time I think of like even earlier today I thought of something that I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And it's usually just like a quick phrase. And sometimes it's something very stupid, like just a quick image or a one sentence thing. And I just write that down in my like Gmail drafts, and that's where I save most of my ideas. And I revisit them like 5 years, like 5 months later or like a month later. And sometimes I look at this, I'm like, what the fuck were you thinking about at this time? So I think it's nice to just catalog these little moments, but sometimes you remember specifically exactly what you were thinking of, and I think it's fun to just kind of jot ideas down. And I think whatever note app or whatever you use, sometimes people don't even need apps. They just kind of remember off their head. But I think it does change the way where like, I will just think about things a bit more, like something that will fascinate me. I can like kind of think about it and write about it later. But I think that even if it's not poetry, I bet most people, whether they create or not, will see something that they find interesting and they will engage with it in their own way down the line. Sometimes it's like you'll wiki something, you'll go watch YouTube videos for a long time. I know a lot of people that are into like murder stuff, so they'll sit and like murder Wikipedia or murder YouTube for like 3 hours. But just, I think it's important to follow the things that fascinate you, and kind of engage with your fascinations a bit more. I think that's been my big takeaway with poetry.
Yeah, hell yeah, I love that. And I think one of the platitudes we always say is, write what you know. I think what we know is also the media and the things that entertain us, that give us delight, that give us pleasure. That the time that you spend doing something you love is not wasted time, but that's something that can feed into your pursuits or your arts. I think it's probably time to open up to the crowd, but maybe just one last question. I feel like that's such good advice that you gave. I wonder if you have other bits. This is just a general question. Good advice for young writers at UCLA to be winning, I guess, in terms of what you just said. But what advice do you have for folks in the audience who see what you're doing and are interested in coming to a similar professional writing life?
I would say that the big thing that I think helps a lot of people and helping me get over it is if you're trying to make it as a writer, eventually you have to send your stuff out. Or if not send, you have to show it to somebody else. And so it doesn't actually matter if you think you're good or not. And I think a lot of writers can be really it can be really tough on themselves. Like, oh, everything I do is shit. Or like, you'll read something like, wow, this is so good. Like one of my favorite quotes is So Much Sharif. Like every time I read anything by her, I'm like, man, I'm like a fucking piece of shit. And so, but that happens to like everybody. And I feel like the thing that's really helpful is you don't have to make that value judgment about your own writing. Is somebody else will tell you if you're good enough or not. And that can be very scary because at the end of unlike games where I can know if I'm good because there are objective ways to get better. There are rankings, there are things I can do that if I'm not good enough, I know how to get better. But with writing, sometimes you don't know that. You could change something up and you could honestly get worse. Sometimes you need to get worse before you get better. And so I will say, as writers, you should really not focus too much on whether you're good or not because it's not your job to decide if you are good or not. But you should make an effort to send things out into the world if you're trying to make it as a writer and just let somebody else deal with it. Like for me, my trick is when I'm writing poems or when I'm writing my esports stuff, there's always one person I write towards. And so with poetry, it's actually my friend Emily Jungman, who's another poet. And my rationale is if I send her a poem and sending stuff out, I think as long as you have fun with it, eventually somebody will like it. And somebody will always find somebody who kind of resonates with what you're doing.
Well, when we had a global ranking system, so we don't know exactly where to start.
That would be, if we could gamify poetry somehow, I think these guys are fun.
Questions? Yeah, Jane.
I love the way that you kind of incorporate your passions or things that people might look down upon as a waste of time into your actual work. So I was interested in I don't know, that relationship between what you enjoy consuming or doing versus what is quote unquote work. Is that a hard line, or do you let them blend together?
I think I got very lucky, to be honest. But I guess ultimately, if you like something enough and you're willing to put in the work to figure out how do I make it work in terms of money, I think there are a lot of critiques I have about capitalism in terms of this we have to there's a lot of things that forces us to do or not do and how it's relates to our art. I think it can be very destructive. But at the end of the day, whether you like it or not, it's just the reality. For me at least, it's just the reality. It doesn't really matter if I think that money is bullshit, if I think that people have to work. I think 9 to 5s are bullshit. But that's still how things are. It's, for me at least, I have found ways to make money, and the money can kind of support what I do like doing. But I was lucky in finding, again, working at a game company doing esports journalism. I was there for so long that it did end up feeling at a certain point it is just here, so that you can still enjoy what you do. Do another job.
These poems because it was the first time that I, as somebody who also comes from immigrant parents, low income, a gamer, lots of siblings, it felt like you were just describing my life too. So it was really awesome to see somebody put towards something that I could never, at least not as eloquent. People don't read, engage with this kind of poetry. Would be a podcast rather than videos or something like that.
I think a lot of it just starts from like high school, to be honest. When I say people don't read, I mostly mean that facetiously. I think people read more than we give them credit. Like for example, actually, I don't even like the thing I read the most is like I read a lot of like Korean webtoons. I don't know if anyone else here, but it's Korean, like it's specifically it's like villainous, isekai, like these weird webtoons. But like that's my shit. Like I feel like as much as I do poetry and gaming, I'm actual area of expertise in villainous isekai webtoons at this point. So that's my expertise. So but I feel like a lot of people they probably read manga, or they read comics, or they read even like cooking instructions, essays before you get through sports articles. Like well, there's fantasy novels. I don't think there's any like I don't look down on anything that people read. I think it's all important. Like the idea is for you to engage and use your brain to kind of like that's you're sitting with your brain when you're reading, right? And I think that's kind of important. And so I do think people read more than we give them credit to. Though I do wish people read more critically, probably, and really thought about what they were reading a bit more. And I think a lot of it started like with poetry in particular. It just starts in high school. I didn't start poetry until I was like 21. Really, whatever you want. And I think that was what was so appealing to me. And you kind of touched on that when you were mentioning like, oh, you can just write. Now is but who cares? Why are you making something with so much care for like who's alive 100 years from now? And there are people that are alive now and engaging with your work now. And I think it's more important to write things for people. That's when you can start engaging at a broader level with other writing. And I feel like that's kind of what's missing these days. Is that I feel like the entry point is all like I think Austin was saying, nice to have somebody accessible. And I feel like like that is something I'm trying to do. Is like I want people to, when they're reading my stuff, like, hey, this is just another dude. When you talk to me, it's like, but it's not always true. Like, so much Sharif is just not another dude. She's like a genius. But I'm just another dude, And I feel like you guys are all just dudes here too. You can also sit down and write your own poems. And I feel like that's the kind of exciting to me about writing today. And there's a lot of people publishing poetry. I think the last 10 years in particular, we've had more books published by Asian American poets in particular than like time in history, and like English publishing history, like put together. And I think the last decade's been really good because people have started to like be able to publish a bit more. And I feel like that's kind of stuff we're starting to see kids I think are interacting with on like TikTok, book club and stuff. Whether that like TikTok's the best place to engage with poetry. I don't have a TikTok, but if it gets kids into it and gets them interested and curious, I think that's where it all really begins. It's just spark that initial interest.
I can't help imagine wanting like an isekai Emily Dickinson villainess webtoon. I'm also going to plug an exceptional set of rankings on Kien's website of anime, manga, and manhwa, and manhwa, and then just all the villainesses. So incredibly useful, actually. Though I have some rankings are subjective.
It's funny. I was talking to my friend about this, and my friend is a woman, and she was like, "Oh, men just love ranking things." And I was like, "Yeah, I love power rankings. Like when you be at a bar, like I've literally been in 10-hour.
We need more men debating the best villainess webtoons. Further questions? Do we have time for more questions? Yeah. More questions? Yeah, Jenna.
I was curious what brought you around to anagrams, because as an English major, well, as a non-business major, I'm really accustomed to thinking of metaphor as, as like a kind of destruction or as a violence. I'm not used to thinking of anagrams in that way, which is how I might, I'm not implying that like your poem is only about destruction, but I associate anagrams with like phone games that bring me great joy, and other kinds of play. So why anagrams particularly?
That's a good question. I think that I also love anagram type games. Like I'm a monster at Boggle. If anybody wants to challenge me in Boggle, I will destroy you. I'm extremely good at Boggle. But that is, I think stuff like that, like wordplay has been interesting. One of my friends once described a lot of the stuff I do is like creating systems that have their own rule sets, and I follow my own rule sets. And I think it's very similar to how I describe my cleanliness as a human being. I think like other people might say I'm messy, but I've never thought of myself as a messy person. I think I'm very organized, and that I know exactly where everything I need is. Even if it's like a sprawl of stuff on the floor, I know exactly how that sprawl is organized. And I think with my poems, I kind of do a similar thing where I have created a rule set for myself that I will adhere to, whether it is a rule set that makes sense for other people or not. And I think a lot of books do things where they create their own. There's a poem by Nick Flynn called Cartoon Physics, where it's a poem that kind of talks about like, a boy running off a cliff, and it's not when he keeps running until he realizes that when he looks down, that's when he can't run anymore. And it's a really beautiful engagement with like what cartoon physics might be, and it's stuff like every time I see stuff like damn, I wish I had done that first, and a lot of poets will create systems for themselves using something that's like, here's a rule set that I think is fun, and I think there's so many different approaches to like with poetry. I love people like, well, how do you tell something new? But I don't think that's really the point. It's like if you think about the way like a dot works, like there are literally like I'm on a mathematical level, there are an infinite number of approaches to this dot. And I think with stories it's the same way. Like if it's a love story or if it's like a story about revenge, somebody might have told a revenge story before, but there are an infinite number of ways to tell it again. And within that infinite retellings, there's always something a little different, something that you can engage with a little bit better. I feel like that's what makes writing so interesting to me, is that we keep telling stories, and at the end of the day, when you distill them down to like what it's about, like nobody's telling anything new these days. And with poetry, it's kind of similar, but I think the approach can be very different, and I find that to be really fascinating. I think that will always draw me back.
Any last question? It's hard to beat a killer. Yes, please.
Yeah, you had mentioned this proliferation of Asian American poets, and I don't know if you were like on Twitter talking about like this sort of like backlash against like, this proliferation of like Vietnamese American like media with like Ocean Above the Ten Win, and this idea that like we still have aesthetic standards as Vietnamese Americans, and like we shouldn't just like let anything get published, and let mediocrity can exist, but like we should acknowledge it as mediocrity and not just stand behind it just because of Vietnamese American. And I was sort of wondering, I guess, for you, what are who are the poets that, not that like you have respect for, but you find yourself in conversation with, that sort of opened up this idea of like what Asian American poetry can be or look like?
Yeah, I think it just addressed the initial conversation. I don't actually remember the Astra thing. I try to keep my head out of poetry Twitter, to be honest. I find it really annoying. Even though I'm friends with a ton of different poets from different spaces at this point. The poetry world is very small. Like, we all know each other, or know somebody who knows each other. And I think it's interesting with the word like the proliferation. I think the word that you mentioned, it's crazy to me to say, there's a proliferation of Vietnamese poets. And it's like literally ocean and Vietnam, when it's like two people. And that's like, that's proliferation, like what? Like, that's insane to me and I think this is an extension of a larger conversation where I hear this, a lot of disgruntled, and it's usually white voices will say something like, there's all, like, it's hard for a white guy to get published now these days, or it's like, all they do is publish like people of color. But when you look at the actual stats, that's not even remotely true. I think somebody looked at the top 50 bestsellers recently, and it was like literally, it was like 49 white men or something at the top of the list. And at the end of the day, for me, it's like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. Like, this happens on like Twitch as well for any gamers in here, where they're like, it's so much easier to make it as a woman if you want to be a streamer. Then you look at the top 50 streams, and it's literally, again, like 49 out of 50 are men. And it's always such a crazy lamenting for me, where it's like, I don't know what you guys are complaining about. And it always feels like it's people. It's like they've never seen these voices before. They've never seen these kind of voices before, and suddenly they are dominant and they take over. And like to call them mediocre is just absolutely insane to me. If you read anything by Ocean every time, and it just makes no sense to me to call them mediocre. I don't know what standards you're being judged against, but again, it's like the standard and the status quo has been developed by centuries, and I think eventually if somebody's saying, well, this is mediocre, you have to ask like the one who's making that declaration and who's comparing it. And I think you always press against the status quo and people making decisions of what is or isn't poetry. I think that's what's kept people for years. Going back to the question earlier, it's like, why do people not care about reading more? It's because these people hold on to these really archaic and old standards for what good is, and they will always tell you to read these old dead people because that's what they were taught, I think have not properly adapted to the times and not properly adapted to technology, which is something that you've mentioned in terms of like digital literacy, and how that has affected and changed people as we've gotten older. And I feel like, yeah, it's like, fuck the haters is kind of the thing. It's like, oh God, there are like 10 Asian writers now that have some sort of name recognition. Like, oh my God, it's like a fucking invasion, you know? Like, who cares?
Well, on that note, fuck the haters. I think it's like a perfect way to run this out. And I just want to thank you for offering a light and offering a guiding direction forward. And I want to invite all of you for to join me in thanking Kien for this wonderful reading and conversation.
Thank you for coming. You have like extra credit for this.